Country music is all about real life.
There are songs that tell a story. It's a story about people.
Mamas, trains, and going away. That's all you got to know to write a country song.
Country is where the heart is, but country is more than music, and photography has captured it.
As the music evolved and the image evolved, photographers captured the entire story of country music.
For a long time, it was boots, hat, fancy shirts, big belt buckles.
You had the rhinestone cowboy look. They were outlandish.
The audience would go crazy about every one of them, and I was there with a camera.
We wore long gowns and this big do up here like this.
A lot of people said we are setting the image of country music back 20 years.
I didn't see what the big deal was. I say, get the camera and let's go, because I know a good picture.
Country is about being connected to something genuine. So I want to make pictures that tell you the truth.
My interest was making them reveal themselves to me.
Are these real people? What is their life really like? I want to grab that moment.
Country music has represented the heart of America for a really long time.
There's so many images that have captured where those artists are at and where country's at.
When you look at that picture and feel that same feeling, that's the shot.
Country music in its origin came from a place that's pure and uncorrupted by the rest of the world.
Early country music was a confluence of European fiddling and the banjo that came from Africa. And when these sounds converged in the American South, you get the building blocks of country music.
It was what you would hear just driving by a house out in the country. Somebody sitting on the front porch, making music to satisfy and entertain themselves.
In the 20s, they were hardcore country people. I mean, they were country people singing about country things.
It wasn't called country music for a long time. It was just folk music, as they called it, Southern folk music. And folk music wasn't considered commercial, but record labels found that once they started recording folk songs with fiddle players and country vocalists, that stuff sold really well.
Some of the first recorded country music came out of Atlanta with a guy named Fiddlin' John Carson, who sells 100,000 copies of that first record. And then in 1924, Vernon Dalhart sells 1 million copies of the Prisoner Song. And then the Carter Family and Jimmie Rodgers recorded in 1927. And that's really the beginning. That's the big bang of country music. That's when it really becomes commercial.
Jimmie Rodgers and the Carter Family were discovered at the Bristol Sessions. It was an all-call, a discovery process where lots of musicians came in, kind of like an early American Idol, only a lot better.
Ralph Peer discovered the Carter Family and Jimmie Rodgers in 1 week in 1927, and all of a sudden we have country music.
The Carter Family give us a body of work that's still with us today. And Jimmie Rodgers becomes a superstar. He was a dandy and set the standard for the country star and influenced so many of those early country performers.
Pop Stoneman, the Gully Jumpers, Dr. Humphrey Bates. Those characters lit the fire on country music, especially the Carter Family. When you look at those photographs, it looked as if the Old Testament had come to life.
Radio comes into American life in the 1930s during the Great Depression, and that's when country music comes of age.
A lot of it was built around barn dances. Musicians would come from all over the region to play, and radio stations like WLS in Chicago and WSM in Nashville would broadcast it out all across the country. Radio was huge for country music.
Country music was an amalgamation of regional sounds. So until there was some sort of mechanism for them to all be delivered nationally, they remained regional. But once country music becomes more widespread and you're hearing it on the radio, it's becoming more professional. And performers would go to studios and have their pictures made. They would be distributed to the radio stations. Those photographs would appear in newspapers.
They purposely would look as country as they could if they were selling what they thought of as rural music. In the early days, guys would come in wearing a suit and a hat and change into overalls and plaid shirts in order to perform because it was part of the image.
Women were consigned to family stereotypes, so the sentimental mother and the pure mountain girl sweetheart were very prominent characters and had prominent roles in country music. It was family entertainment, and there were cultural expectations about who they were supposed to be.
You're selling music to a certain kind of people, a certain kind of American, and the image plays into that. Jimmie Rodgers is going to wear a brakeman hat. Kitty Wells reflects that sweet country girl image. You're going to have the hillbilly look. The image is completely tied to the music.
I've always thought of hillbilly as an endearing term, but Ernest Tubb used to say, if you're going to call me hillbilly, you damn well better smile when you do it.
In the late 1930s and early 40s, you got the singing cowboys out in Hollywood with Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, Tex Ritter. And that changes the image of country music because no kid wants to grow up being a hillbilly and everybody wants to grow up being a cowboy.
The cowboy hat became this iconic image that spoke of romance, it spoke of truth, honesty, and good old American way.
Gene Autry was a huge star and a great influence on country music, not for what he sounded like, but for what he looked like, because he really popularized that Western look. And others followed Autry's path.
The cowboy look came into country music, influenced by Western culture with the boots, and some of the acts wore hats. That was around for a long period of time, and then it began to phase out, and people came into other styles and other ways of trying to present themselves.
Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, Bill Monroe never went on stage without a coat and a tie. They looked like gentlemen and they acted like gentlemen.
In the 50s, the women wore dresses with the belt that came in at the waist and the hair that was flipping up all over the place, you know, that really classic kind of country feel.
June Carter looked so much like a lady with a chiffon dress on, and she'd do that bit where she crossed her legs and showed her pantaloons for her comedy act.
If you were a new artist, the studio was going to send you to get your photo taken by Walden Fabry. It was a rite of passage. Walden Fabry was a Chicago photographer. Minnie Pearl met him in Chicago and talked him into coming to Nashville because country artists didn't have anyone like that making these amazing glamour shots. And that's what got sent out to radio and fan magazines. And those photos were what he needed to sell the music. If you're an artist, you might go to a different photographer for different things. Elmer Williams was a photographer just having fun. He started out as an amateur. In the 50s, he started hanging out backstage in Nashville and made friends with all these country music artists. And then he started getting some work in town. He took photos for tobacco companies who were big sponsors for country artists. Philip Morris sponsored this tour with Carl Smith and Ronnie Self. And that's what they toured on. It wasn't fancy at all. Elmer Williams shot for about 10 years, and then he applied to be a policeman. And apparently it was his biggest dream because he stopped photography and never picked it back up again. And he was completely out of the country music world.
Country music in the 40s and the 50s was fighting music, dance music, drinking music, good time music.
They sang soulful songs about life, life and love, really. It was Ernest Tubb.
were resonating with millions of people. This is where the roots of country was from. Simple and absolutely timeless, even down to the perfect curve of the hat, you know.
Country music had become the American sound and could be heard all across the country. But by the late 50s, things were changing.
Country music was in the doldrums. The big artists like Hank Snow and Ernest Tubb, their careers were on the downhill slide because there was this thing called rock and roll and rockabilly.
In my day in rock and roll,
Elvis Presley thought of himself as a country singer. He just happened to be a really fast, energetic one.
I appeared with Elvis December the 13th, 1957. He was just getting started. The great success was yet to come, even though he was really, really popular.
Elvis and Buddy Holly took all these kids away who'd been loving Webb Pierce and Ray Price and all this shuffling honky-tonk music. And the fate of country music was in question.
There were a lot of country fans that embraced rock and roll, but there were still people that liked the traditional sounds of country. They began to come back. And the Grand Ole Opry was very important. It laid the foundation for what we call Music City. I'm not sure that Nashville would be Nashville had it not been for the Grand Ole Opry.
There was a Grand Ole Opry history picture book that would come around every now and then when I was a kid. And the photography made me want to be a part of country music as much as the music did. And the photographer, I kept noticing, shot after shot, was Les Leverett. He shot from the heart in a different way.
I went to work at the Grand Ole Opry as a photographer, April 1st, 1960, and gosh, I loved it. When I started, it was really a big, big thing. You could hardly buy a ticket. The crowd would line up outside and go around the block. It was the biggest country music show in the world. And that's a big dream in those days, if you were a country music star, to be a member of the Grand Ole Opry. And if not, at least to sing on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry.
My song, City Lights, was a big hit and opened all the doors for me in Nashville. But when I got the phone call asking me if I wanted to be a part of the Grand Ole Opry, it was like asking me if I wanted to go to heaven when I die.
Everybody had suits in those days with sequins shining in the spotlights. And see those fancy boots? It was glamorous. They would have a 30-minute show and a star would come out and sing. Seldom did they do more than one song. Or as one guy said one night, one song per hillbilly, buddy. I shot so many acts. Grandpa Jones, Minnie Pearl, the Jordanaires, Jim Reeves. But I'm so busy making pictures, trying to get a good shot, I don't know what they sang.
Les Leverett gave country music so much of its importance and its image because he was there to document it when nobody else was paying attention.
Here's one made into the opera.
Oh, look at
I'll
that.
sneak in there.
That's a nice photo. You never knew who was going to show up at the Opry. I love to just look through my dad's photographs. It always amazes me how much he has contributed to country music history. I remember when I was small, and I would go backstage at the Opry with you at the Ryman Auditorium. We'd go in the big back door, and it was like going into a fair. It was so cool. The atmosphere backstage was like a family. I watched my dad work, and he knew the artists that he was photographing. So when Dad took those photographs, there was emotion. He waited until just the right time to capture the moment with the camera.
There was always something exciting going on, and I'd go anywhere. Knock on the dressing room door. You couldn't tell if they said come in or not, so I would just go in. I was shameless.
When I first came here, the Grand Ole Opry was basically a radio show, and it had been since 1925.
In 1925, the National Life Insurance Company in Nashville decided to open a radio station, WSM Radio.
WSM was carrying opera from New York. One day, the announcer said to the radio listeners, for the past hour you've been listening to Grand Opera. Now we're going to bring you the Grand Ole Opry. And he just said it off the cuff.
So WSM developed their little program into the Grand Ole Opry. WSM stands for We Shield Millions, which was the insurance company's motto. And they used the radio show to sell insurance. Their agents would go to homes and knock on the door and say, I'm from the Grand Ole Opry, and give them a little brochure with opera stars' pictures. Well, come in. See, they got in, and next thing you know, they've sold a burial policy or something. But the Opry came on really strong and just kept growing. So many people wanted to be on that radio once it got started.
Uncle Dave Macon, at 50 years old, was the first star of the Grand Ole Opry. Plays that banjo and whirls it around. It was just entertainment then, and that's what Uncle Dave Macon was. He was an entertainer. But the story of country music is a fight for respect. They want to be respected as musicians, and so what we see is that move to the rhinestones. And basically that was poor folks saying, I'm somebody. That was hillbilly bling.
A lot of country artists wore custom clothes and custom boots and flashy things, and a guy by the name of Nudie made their clothing.
When Nudie came along, they started putting on those heavy suits with all those sequins. When those spotlights hit those things, they started twinkling.
The Nudie suit was such a unique style. It set Nashville in country music apart from the other genres. When you look at classic country photography, the Webb Pierces of the world, Lefty Frizzells of the world always wore a Nudie suit. It made country music distinct. And it was so cool.
I was very comfortable wearing rhinestones, but these were suits that people used to tease me and ask me if you plug them in and they light up.
The clothes you wore, that was part of your story. Porter Wagoner, the thin man from West Plains, up there on the Opry stage, wore these remarkable suits with wagon wheels, because it was Porter Wagoner and the Wagon Masters.
The fans in those days really loved those sparkles, and I was there with a camera. But in addition to my job, I started doing LP covers. I've done 197 covers that I know about, and I would always try to make the picture look like the title of the album.
I'm just asking you to listen.
In 1967, I did a picture of Porter Wagoner dressed up as a bum for Confessions of a Broken Man, and we did it on the back steps of the Ryman Auditorium. They say Porter went down to some of the offices on Music Row later and asked for a handout, and nobody knew who he was, and they asked him to leave. I always felt I was just trying to get a good shot of whoever I was working on. Like when Loretta Lynn found out she was the latest member of the Grand Ole Opry, and she's just excited beyond belief. But I just went wherever people wanted me to go. There was a recording session at Columbia Studios. June Carter was sitting there, and Johnny is whispering to her because the first session, Johnny never showed up. And he's trying to soothe her so she wouldn't feel bad at him. With Johnny Cash, you knew you were going to get good expressions. You couldn't get a bad picture of him, I didn't think.
30,000 enlargements and 40,000 color transparencies.
I'm the man in black.
It wasn't until after my father's passing in 1993 that I discovered most of the Johnny Cash work, just under 500 photographs. Most of them black and white, some color.
Lee Weiner photographed Johnny Cash between 1960 and 60.
A portrait is not a duplication of a face. A portrait is the revelation of a person. You want to tell something about the person.
He didn't like filters in his camera, preferred no makeup, and made every frame count. He developed a rapport with most of his subjects, and you can see by the imagery that they developed a rapport during the course of their shoots. The images tell that quite loudly.
Lee Weiner develops this relationship with Johnny Cash, and they go out to Gene Autry's ranch. Those photographs point to the singing cowboy, a particular code of ethics, and then you have Johnny Cash standing in some ways against that. He becomes that very American idea of tradition, but rebelliousness as well.
I recognize the qualities that make my dad iconic, and there's a lot of projections that go on to him, a lot of which are not true. When my dad started out, he was not totally a real country music artist. He was from Memphis, he wasn't from Nashville, and he did not think specifically about country. He just didn't. He listened to what they called race music, and that was hugely influential.
Johnny Cash broke in as a rockabilly guy in the 1950s on Sun Records in Memphis, along with this incredible stable of artists like Elvis Presley and Carl Perkins and Roy Orbison. But in the 1960s, he moved over to Columbia Records, Nashville-based, and did really well.
Johnny Cash wrote some incredible songs. He became a tremendous influence on country music. But it's more than that. He could walk in a room behind you, and you felt his presence there.
He had a charisma that very, very few people have. Cash was larger than life. He wasn't just an entertainer.
I got a call from his guitar player, Bob Wooten. He says, John wants to know if you'd be interested in playing in the band. And so when we were introduced, he just kept looking at me and kept shaking my hand. Well, I prepared since I was a little boy to shake hands with Johnny Cash. He said, you know my songs? I said, probably all of them. And he said, you got anything black to wear?
You see these classic Cash images, and the pictures tended towards gravity and depth and weight. And Manuel would make these remarkable suits for him.
One time, Johnny Cash says, well, I want to talk to you. He says, I'm on the road. I'm going to go on the road, and I need nice suits, like, right away, man. So I started sewing, and later he was on the road, and he says, I got these suits. How come they're all black? One time, he said, well, I wore black before, but Manuel put me in a better black. There was something about him. He had that aura, but he created his own image.
My father cast a very large shadow. And image is crucial to the artist, but the image has to be authentic.
The late 50s and into the 60s is what we call the Nashville sound era of country music. When the sound went uptown, there was a lot of piano as opposed to fiddle. It was an updating. Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley, these two genius producers, were the architects of that sound, shifting the sound more towards pop.
Nashville was this magic land. It was on the back of every record. You flip it over and it would say, recorded in Nashville, Tennessee, recorded in Nashville, Tennessee. So that's where you go to make records. There was the Music Row, 16th and 17th Ave, and building after building after building was either a studio or a record company. But Nashville is a very traditional town. So when Chet Atkins put an orchestra and a string section on a country record, it's pretty blasphemous. It's got nothing to do with Ernest Tubb. It's got nothing to do with Hank Sr. And they make no bones about the fact that they were trying to reach a bigger audience.
Chet Atkins signed me in June '64. I wasn't really career-minded. I just wanted to sing. But the controls were tighter back then, and they wanted me to go middle of the road. They said, you can sing more than country.
They were trying to give it a more contemporary sound. Some people said it's destroying our genre. But country is constantly changing, and what's deemed traditional keeps moving.
And after the war, a lot of them stayed in Bakersfield because there was work in the oil fields. So the Bakersfield sound is really the music of Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and these guys didn't care what Nashville was doing.
The explosion of Bakersfield was an answer to the popish type of sound that was coming out of Nashville. One of the key events was Buck Owens strapping on a Telecaster guitar. That was a very different sound for country music. It was rough and edgy and kind of a honky-tonk thing.
Buck Owens got his first job at a honky-tonk in Bakersfield, and then got his first big break when Capitol Records signed him. And then by about 1961, all of a sudden, America couldn't get enough Buck Owens, and that role just kept going. You look at photos from Bakersfield, it was just jeans and button-down shirts, nothing fancy. But once Buck Owens
Cafe Reefer on it. And he said, I'll just leave it there. I'll make a house out of it. My father passed away when I was 9, and pretty soon I wouldn't mind my mother and I wouldn't go to school. So they put me in reform school. And I ran away and stole a car, so I was guilty of a felony. I was 19 years old and I was in prison.
I turned 21 in prison, doing life without parole.
New Year's Day in San Quentin, 1958, Johnny Cash played what was called the Warden's Show. He played prisons all over America, and I saw how he was able to capture the audience. And for the first time in my life, I had a hint on what I might be doing the rest of my life. I spent 2 years, 9 months in San Quentin. When I got out, I wound up with my own band, and we played a type of country music that was identified with a steel guitar, or better known as a pedal guitar. And when we came on board with that sound, it was different. Nashville was happening, and if somebody started to make a little noise somewhere, they'd get you on the phone and say, come join the Grand Ole Opry. So we didn't go down there. I always wanted to be different from Nashville. I wore a different kind of boot just to let people know that I wasn't a hillbilly. I was a flatlander. So very early in my career, I was typecast as a rebel. Johnny Cash had been into jail one time for 4 hours, but everybody thought he was an ex-con. He looked the part. And he said to me one time, Haggard, he said, you're everything people think I am. I was doing a Johnny Cash network show, and he talked me into letting it go public that I had been in prison. So he told the audience.
And he sings those prison songs like, well, you'd think he's been there. Merle Haggard.
And I'm glad that I did it, because I don't like to be lied to. If you lie to people, they'll reject you. You've got to be an honest person. Your music's got to be honest, or else your tour will be over and you'll be back in the oil fields. So I kept on making music the way I heard it, and right or wrong, it'll be honest.
The essence of country is that it's the music of the white working class, or the white Southern working class. And it articulates their thoughts, feelings, issues.
It was imagined as the music of pure mountain culture, which was understood as white. And that was part of its marketing appeal. But that was really a fiction.
There are people who say country is white music, or they'll refer to blue-eyed soul. But there was a tremendous African-American influence in early country music. And a major star of the Grand Ole Opry was a black harmonica player named DeFord Bailey. In fact, the first music that anyone heard on the Grand Ole Opry radio show was DeFord Bailey's harmonica. But Nashville emerged at a time when the South was deeply segregated, and he was fired in 1941 in a racially informed dispute.
The general consensus is that he was expected to follow orders in a way that white artists were not, which he chafed against, and they fired him. It was reflecting the culture of segregation and people who wanted a return to a pure white culture. And in the early 1960s, country music became associated with racism when George Wallace started to use country music in his campaigns.
Alabama Governor George Wallace made a campaign promise to prevent the integration of the last all-white state university.
And there were country music artists who did go and support George Wallace. At the same time, the country music industry was consciously seeking a way to change its image. So when Ray Charles recorded Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music, you used to see all of these pictures of Ray Charles in country music magazines. It was not a country record, but they were trying to use the success of his album, and especially his image, to reimagine what the country audience looked like.
Ray Charles was doing country songs, but he wasn't a country singer. And no significant African-American star emerged in this music until renegade producer Cowboy Jack Clement took Charlie Pride into the recording studio.
So I feel so blue, sometimes I wanna die.
My career was smack dab in the middle of the civil rights.
And so I've got...
And a lot of people thought I was a little bit off. Meaning, how do you think you're gonna make it in a white man's music? Like I wasn't thinking straight or something. But I wasn't discouraged. because it's my music too if I like it. I grew up in Sledge, Mississippi, 55 miles below Memphis, Tennessee. My dad's favorite artist was Bill Monroe, the Bluegrass Boys. And I just got hooked on it. I bought me a Sears Roebuck guitar when I was about 14 years old. And if I heard a song I like, I would sing it. I was picking cotton alongside my dad, and I said, I ain't gonna be no cotton picker. My dream was to go to the Major League, and when I saw Jackie Robinson do it, I said, here's my chance. I'll go and break all the records in baseball, then I can sing. I played in the old Negro League, right behind Ernie Banks, Hank Aaron, and Willie Mays, and I was really good. But I cracked my elbow in 1956, and I still thought I could make it. I went up to Montana to play in the Pioneer League. Then I went to spring training with Gene Autry's team, the Angels, in '61. And the next year, spring training with the Mets, but they wouldn't look at me. So I got there, I just didn't stay. People always encouraged me to go to Nashville. And that's what I did. I met Jack Johnson, who ended up being my manager. Jack had always told people, if you find me a colored guy that sang country music, you send him to me. He took his glasses and he looked, he says, hi, sing something. So he heard me, he said, where are you from? I said, well, I was born and raised in Sledge, Mississippi. I said, I live in Montana now. How do they take you up there? I said, well, about the way you're doing right now when they first see me. And they give me 7 songs to work up. We do the demo, and Chet Atkins took the dub and played it for RCA. And they said, we like it, good voice, good voice. And then they passed my picture around. And everybody kind of looked at one another, and they all said, we're still gonna sign him. We're just not gonna say anything about the uniqueness of the pigmentation, you know? They signed me September of '65. They never said anything about color. They just released the record out there to all of the DJs, and they let the rumors start. So what color you think he is? What do you mean what color you think he is? He's white. No, no. What? How much you want to bet?
At a time when there was fighting in the streets about segregation, people learned to love the music before they figured out what the guy looked like. And once you love something, it's hard to take that back.
I always thought that I was just as good as anybody else and wasn't no worse. I had more obstacles to walk around than the average fight. But people like my voice. There's something about it. And I'm just glad that I was given a chance to sing, and everything turned out beautiful.
You can't segregate the airwaves. Country demanded a stylistic and cultural cross-pollination. By the 1960s, Nashville was a top-down town with producers really running the show.
The producers chose the musicians. They worked in the same studios all the time. They often helped choose the songs.
And some people demanded to be in control of their music in a way they had not been before. They were the outlaws. You have Willie Nelson, who had a very atypical way of singing, and he was made to fit in, being instructed how to sound, what to wear. He looked like he could be an insurance salesman. He went back down to Texas and said, to heck with all this, I'm gonna do something else. And by 1973, he looked like Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson identified with hippies, and hippie culture was such a powerful aspect of America. A lot of musicians were smoking pot and experimenting with drugs and growing their hair, and it certainly influenced country music.
You had people like Kris Kristofferson come along, changing the language of this music. Kristofferson was as influenced by Bob Dylan as he was by Hank Williams.
Great singer-songwriters showed me what songs could be. Songs didn't necessarily have to have a catchy line that repeated over and over. A song could be about something. A song could tell a story and be way more than a song.
The Outlaws wanted to use their own bands. They wanted to decide how they sounded, how they looked.
Waylon Jennings was about leather and looking like he just jumped off his motorcycle, but that was what the outlaw movement was about. It was about distinction.
Waylon Jennings was the first country artist to appear at Max's Kansas City in New York. And believe me, in the early 70s, no one was interested in country music on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But everyone wanted to see Waylon because he was a renegade, an independent, wild cowboy. I photographed him. He was posing, flirting, and New York just went crazy for Waylon. I've been photographing country music my whole career, practically shortly after rock and roll. The fourth roll of film that I ever took was a concert with Janis Joplin, and I thought those pictures were beautiful, and she looked amazing, and my interest was piqued. I wanted to go to more shows and shoot more performances. I photographed artists like The Who, B.B. King. I shot John Lennon's birthday. I photographed so many legends. It was just amazing. But my first assignment in Nashville was Johnny Cash.
Hello.
It's, hello, little lady. Can I help you? It was awesome. My fate was sealed. I started coming to Nashville, and I would photograph country artists for magazines in New York. It wasn't necessarily the kind of place that I was accustomed to, but I liked the people and I liked the artists.
Rayanne coming in the early 70s when country music was struggling to find its way into the mainstream, and then taking it back to her world was almost like having a correspondent. It gave country music a voice.
When you start seeing country music performers in Time magazine and in Rolling Stone, it becomes a stamp of approval, a sign that there's a wider audience. And photographers are recording not just the performer, but the culture.
When I got affiliated with Nashville, there was a specific look for country artist photos. Photographers were not hired by the labels to tell the truth about the personalities of their stars. And that is my exact interest. I like making them reveal themselves to me. And I felt that if you put that into a photo, it would make your artist even more successful.
I like a song that clicks with me, and it's the same thing with a picture. You go through a whole contact sheet of pictures, and then there's just this one that just has something. You can read somebody's soul in a picture sometimes.
With Tammy Wynette, the shoes, the glasses, the wig reflected her taste and her lifestyle, whether the person is playing an instrument or standing on the porch with his wife. My job is to put together a little story that's revealing about them. Some people see them the way I do. I had an assignment from Life magazine to shoot country artists in their tour buses because that was very unusual. At the time, most rock and roll artists flew, and almost no one had buses, only country artists. Dolly Parton was on the cover, and I shot her in her bus. She was already a queen of country music.
Dolly knew where she was going when she came to Nashville, right after high school. I think she came over here the day after she graduated. She knew what she wanted to do, and the girl had the talent to do it.
She was a member of the Porter Wagoner band, but every once in a while she'd put out a record, and they were starting to do better than his records. I photographed Dolly Parton in 1972, backstage at Symphony Hall in Boston. She definitely stood out in the crowd. Dolly is the ultimate entertainer, and the way she presents herself is part of that.
Dolly asked me to do the cover on the album Bubbling Over, so we went out to a fountain over there at the Hall of Fame, and sure enough, we drew a crowd. You can't help it with Dolly Parton. And then I thought, why don't we get a close-up or two of Dolly here? Then I put the transparencies together, and that became the cover.
What's unique about photography is that you have to tell a story without any words and capture the essence of the moment in a 250th of a second.
Photography put us out there in front of people and portray us as we truly are. I signed my recording contract when I was 12, and my image from the start was the girl next door. You couldn't dress it up or dress it down. I had to be who I was. Back then, the record-buying public were girls. So my image was cemented by what they thought of me. I was a little girl with a big voice, but you could see the growth. Every time an album came out, you would see a little different Brenda. And later on, photographers took what I was and expanded on it. It was a little slice of life and letting people into your home a little bit to see your family. But I wasn't afraid to show that. Country artists are accessible to their fans, and that is really special. But my goodness, I hope Ronnie got rid of those pants. When you grow up with the country way of life, it teaches you so much, and your beliefs are solidified by the people around you.
A lot of us learned to sing in church. We were raised by God-fearing, good, honest, decent, hard-working people. So the gospel influence was very big.
When you hear gospel music and when it lifts you, it's the spirit behind it, I think, that makes the difference. And country music is that way.
But it's not a bright, well-defined line. If you're in despair, if you're in trouble, if your heart is broken, you turn to Jesus. In country music, if you're in despair and your heart is broken, you go have a beer.
People, when they're having a hard time, they need someone to identify with. When I sing, I'm telling a story. And when I get a hold of a song, I'm gonna get it across and make sure they can hear what I'm saying, because the most important thing is that you do connect with the audience.
People feel very connected to country music, and in some ways feel that those singers aren't that separate from who they are. When I was starting my photography career, and I had friends who had a record company, and they needed pictures of their musicians. So they would get me a pass to the Grand Ole Opry. The old-style singers that I was photographing weren't people with a lot of pretense, like Roy Acuff, king of country music, who kind of ruled the Grand Ole Opry for decades. As a photographer, I'm interested in country music and the people who make the music, but I'm mostly interested in the place and the people who make up the place. In the 70s, there were 7 honky-tonks in Boston. These are places I used to go quite a lot to photograph. Nashville North, and the Blue Star Lounge, and the Hillbilly Ranch, most famous of all. And as honky-tonk as I've ever seen anything. And people like Grandpa Jones, who started in Boston, would come by all the time to perform. The old-style honky-tonk was a place outside of town, near no schools or churches, with live music, a place where working people went out and had themselves a beer on Friday, Saturday night, maybe got to meet somebody, maybe got to dance, maybe got into a fight, and it was glamorous on some level. I saw this honky-tonk culture starting to disappear, and I wanted to document these people, record their lives, and make them part of history. Tootsie was a legendary character in Nashville. She ran this successful honky-tonk on Lower Broadway, Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. It was a different kind of person that went in there that would go into a country music show today. And you could go in and write your name, and stars would go in and write their names too. Supposedly, Willie Nelson wrote Crazy there for Patsy Cline. And performers will come from all over to Tootsie's in hopes that they can somehow make a connection.
Tootsie's was famous to me because I'd read all about it in all the history books. So when I came to Nashville, I went into Tootsie's and got up to sing kind of impromptu. And by the end of my little mini set, they'd offered me a job. I played at Tootsie's on and off for tips for 2.5, 3 years, doing covers and a lot of traditional country, singing the people's music, singing about what people were living and breathing every day of their lives. But it was a different time and a different culture.
It was a drinking culture. It was a blue-collar culture. It was a different world. But this is where the music's from.
People had beliefs and customs that we didn't have in New York, and there were prejudices.
They were called rubes and were perceived as promiscuous, poverty-stricken, stupid, and people made fun of country music. They associated it with a hayseed hillbilly audience.
There's always been stereotypes in country music, and the media and television played off this idea of what Southerners were like.
Two Canadian producers came to me and said, we're getting ready to do a musical variety show, not unlike Laugh-In. Would you be interested? Well, I found out early in life that you say yes to everything.
When Hee Haw came out, country music had been trying to get away from the bales of hay and the cornbread image. And everybody said this will just be a disaster.
The critics screamed. They thought it was the worst piece of trash they'd ever seen. But country music fans said, at last, here's something that I can identify with.
It was visual, and you didn't have to be an intellectual to understand it. There was just one thing right after another, one cut right after another.
Bam, 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 ha, ha. Music, a funny look. Then we'd pop out of the cornfield. I was hosting with Buck Owens, and I don't think any other combination would have been the same.
Here, Roy, we
got something that says hee-haw here.
Because Buck had the radio play and sold records, and I was known on television. So the two of us brought in two different audiences.
Hee-haw was the hottest show in the country, and that brought a lot of people to like country music that never before even thought about country music.
We were on CBS for 2.5 seasons, and hee-haw was still high in the ratings, but CBS started complaining about its hillbilly image. They said, it's not the audience that our sponsors want to see. We have to get rid of it. So they took Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, and hee-haw, and let us all go.
Hee-haw! But that wasn't the end of the hee-haw. They syndicated the show, and it actually had a bigger audience than when it was on the network because they were on more stations. And all of a sudden, country music was everywhere.
It was really exceptional. They always had 3 or 4 guests every week, and they got all the top people, Loretta Lynn, Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash.
Willie did it, Merle Haggard. In fact, a lot of the big stars today got their break and their first national exposure on hee-haw. And we just grew. We were in production for 28 years.
Some people felt it was insulting and set country music back. But there was part of hee-haw that was really great for country because it was in every home, because it exposed so many artists, and because it was so popular.
Hee-haw made people laugh and made people feel better. That was the power of that show.
We never hurt anyone. We had nothing to gain except sin. We'll put on the corny stuff, and let's you and I have some fun together. And everywhere you went, people would say, I'm a-picking. And I would say, well, I'm a-grinning.
In the 1970s, the look and sound of country music started changing. And when I was a kid, Ernest Tubb and the Texas Troubadours came to my hometown county fair wearing matching pink cowboy suits. It was hillbilly Hollywood, and it was beautiful. But nudie suits were out of style and kind of an embarrassment to the new image of modern country music. And I'm thinking, this is not right. Somebody needs to be taking pictures. Photography was almost parallel to music to me as a kid. I started when I was 12 years old, playing bluegrass festivals, and then I played the Lester Flats Band. His peers were Roy Acuff, Bill Monroe, String Bean, and when we would go on the road, these characters would all be together. It looked like history in motion, and nobody seemed to ever have a camera. So I just simply started to photograph the proceedings because I was there, and I fell in love with photography. The images from that time are very precious because in the late 70s and early 80s, the old sound, the old look of country music was kind of having to fight for its life because the urban cowboy thing had come in so strong.
Urban cowboy represented a new version of country that was younger, that was club-based and dance-based. It set up the line dance craze and showed that that Southern image, that identity could be exported anywhere.
And all of a sudden, guys in New York were buying cowboy boots and wanting to learn how to two-step. Country music was appealing to a lot of people who hadn't thought of themselves as country fans, and records were selling bigger than ever.
You had the term crossover. When a record got so hot that not just country folks wanted to hear it, other people wanted to hear it, and so country singers crossed over from the country charts, and the pop radio stations would play them. There were people like Glenn Campbell and Dottie Weston. Later, Ronnie Mills said,
the country fans like it, but people who like all kinds of music like it too. And I always loved playing all kinds of music. It started just because I heard records on the radio. I grew up in the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. My mother did not want to raise a blind child. It could be that she didn't really know how. So I was raised by my grandparents. I learned Braille when I was 6. I learned violin when I was 7, piano at 8. I had a musical aptitude, and any song that I could hear, I could play it. So I came out of school wanting to make these things that I was hearing on the radio called records. I started out as an R&B singer in Memphis and had a top 5 hit on the first record we put out. But Charlie Pride heard me sing, and he said, I can tell from listening to your voice, you are a country singer. You need to move to Nashville. So I signed a contract with Charlie Pride's manager, and he went right to the president of RCA, Jerry Bradley. And Jerry said, "We know Roddy Millsap. He's not a country singer." But he listened to my demos and said, "You know what? That SOB can sing country." And all of a sudden, I'm on RCA Records. That's the record label of Charlie Pride, of Elvis Presley. Record I put out. Country fans, they don't want you to stray from country, but you can't be afraid to try something new because your intuition may be right.
You got to know when to hold up, know when to fold up.
I took a lot of flack for taking country music pop, but I'm a country artist with a lot of other musical influences, and I've never worn a cowboy hat in my life. I was the first artist to work large venues with lots of production. I was wearing three-piece suits, white suits, and it wasn't an attempt to be bizarre. It was just where I was comfortable at the time. And I think I was resented for taking it away from that country base. But country music is what country people will buy. And you can't do what everybody else is doing.
When the deal is done.
You develop styles in this business by listening to what people say. I didn't really know her at the time, but once she walked in, that song was never the same. We both just kind of locked into each other. Your image will attract attention, but then you have to sell it with the music. And if you give me a song that touches me, I can make it touch somebody else. Country is where the heart is. And in country music, if it hurts, you say it hurts. And I saw the value to simple songs with lyrics that had something to say. I don't want to just sing words, because it's not a song, it's a story. When people hear The Gambler, they realize that's a great way to live your life. Know when to walk away and know when to run. We're all three people. I'm who I think I am, I'm who you think I am, and I'm who I really am. And throughout my whole career, I tried to stay true to who I was.
What makes us beautiful is our differences. I got started early. I was a 13-year-old kid when I recorded Delta Dawn, and my producer said, "I don't want anybody to know that this girl's 13 years old, because this is a great record. We don't want a freak show." But that song was meant to be. Growing up, everybody called me the female Elvis. And I thought country music should be bigger than it was. I wanted to take it to another place, but I love to have fun. And when I moved to LA, I started drinking. You know, the party didn't start till I got there. That's when I did the TNT album. It was a bad deal all the way around. I got a bunch of bad reviews. They didn't like the music, and especially didn't like the pictures. I didn't even notice the microphone cord was between my legs. My manager put an ad in Hustler magazine, said, "This album is so good, it's gonna get your ears hard." But if I'd been involved, I don't think I'd approve of that. I became known as the bad girl of country music. A lot of people. A voice is the gift, and I just sing the songs best I know how.
People feel very close to country music, and they feel that they could be that person on stage, but you go to a rock and roll show, there's no way you're going to be that person.
I think a lot of rock guys wanted to play the guitar to meet girls and go on the road, but it seemed like country musicians are a little more serious. I'm comfortable shooting musicians because I'm a musician in my heart and a photographer in my head. I first picked up a camera in '66 on the road with my folk singing group, the Modern Folk Quartet. We stopped at a little store in East Lansing, Michigan, and bought these secondhand cameras and started taking pictures of each other and whatever we saw. When I got back to LA, I had a slideshow, and it was amazing to see these images huge on the wall. That got me hooked. So I started photographing my friends, who were virtually all musicians. Stephen Stills, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell playing a mountain dulcimer. My favorite way of photographing is to fly on the wall to try to get candid shots and see what was really happening. J.D. Souther was a terrific songwriter, and his girlfriend at the time was Linda Ronstadt. I photographed Linda very early on. She did a concert in L.A., singing in harmony with Emmylou Harris. I photographed Emmylou at the Troubadour and hanging out in the San Fernando Valley. Glenn Campbell had his own television show, The Glenn Campbell Show. And I was on the other side of the dressing room, sneaking little candid shots. I don't feel like I make photographs. I'm just lucky enough to be the guy there to push the button to grab that moment. Chris Christopherson was recording an album in Colorado, and I'm looking for that moment when they really shine, and then catch it as it happens. Even the stuff you do on stage, that's all lit and very exciting. But I'm looking for the person to look the way I think they look the best. And I get to pick the moments. In the 80s, I ended up doing a lot of work with Capitol Records, and they had a new artist named Garth Brooks.
I'm an average Joe from Oklahoma, and I just wanted to be George Strait. That's all I want to do. Pictures capture some of the biggest highlights of my life.
When I work with Garth, I can go anywhere, and that's fantastic, because you get all these great vantage points, like standing out on the edge of the stage from behind.
When a photographer captures you and all you see are people and the New York skyline, that picture is the truth. You can feel everything that people were there felt.
A lot of country artists have a microphone and they stand there, they play the guitar, and they don't move around a lot. Garth Brooks never stands in one place. He'd be standing right here, I put a wide angle and look up, oh, he's over there now. Now I gotta switch to a telephoto. By the time I get that on, he's back on that side. He did crazy things like smash guitars, get bottles of water and shake them all over. Then the good stuff happens. He'd climb the rigging and swing on a rope. It was amazing.
The arms were out, legs were moving. If there was a cowboy hat in the shot, even if it was blurred, that meant movement. That action symbolized what we stood for.
A decade before, cowboy hats had been out of fashion. The only guys in cowboy hats were Hank Williams Jr., Charlie Daniels, guys who weren't really mainstream country. When George Strait came along in the early 80s, he was wearing a cowboy hat, and by the late 80s, it became iconic again.
It became the hat era, and all the guys were wearing hats. Dwight Yoakam, Clint Black, Alan Jackson. Somebody in the music business said, when you get a record deal, you need to wear that hat. There is no girl doing that. Be the first one. And when I first got signed, I wore the hat in, and my manager said, they're not really sure. Well, I think I should wear it. I think they're crazy if they make me wear spike heels. I would have looked like I was in drag walking in that. It would have been ridiculous. And it's become a big part of my image. If there was anybody that didn't know my name and somebody said the girl in the hat, oh, I know who that is.
I don't think the image of me could have ever matched my voice. I've been in this business for 20 years, and when you start as a child, your image evolves so much. In the 90s, I dressed like a teenager. I had really big hair and big bangs. By the time I was 18, I started to be a little more fashionable because country music was going a little more pop, and the image changed with that. People like Reba took country music to a different kind of sophistication.
First nominee is Reba McEntire.
I think of the red dress.
I designed that dress, and the lighting enhanced the cleavage. People gasped, and I didn't know if I was going to have a job the next day. Reba received more press from the red dress than if she would have won an award.
Reba McEntire was famous for having 15 costume changes in a single show, with some of the changes happening on stage while she's surrounded by dancers. And as it becomes apparent by the early 90s what a big business country music is, women are becoming more visible, and Reba began the transformation that you see later with Shania Twain or Faith Hill, where they are taking on the style of rock and pop stars.
Country singers were now wearing higher fashion. They were more trendy and started gaining attention from designers who would then loan them clothes. And the image of the artist became more important than it had been.
If I feel like wearing something, I wear it. If I feel like looking a certain way, I just do it. And I don't follow rules very well at all. And that's got me in trouble many times in my life, because I have always been the one who wore the too short dress or showed too much cleavage. So the record labels give me the real short haircut to try and make me sultry. And then I would get too sultry and they'd have to pull the reins back.
Everybody has their own image. And that's the beauty of coming from a rural area, like so many of us did. Country boys and girls can kind of make it up as you go. We're self-made characters.
Grandpa Jones wouldn't have been Grandpa Jones without his hat, or string bean without the pants down to here, without his long shirt. That was part of their image.
These artists were very aware that the way they looked was part of the show, and that was included in the price of the ticket. And they worked hand in hand.
People want to see a show, but if you don't see something that you have not seen before, why spend the $20 or the $1,000 for the front seat? I worked for Nudie for 14 years before I went on my own. I grew up with ranchera music in Mexico, so I was very familiar with the meaning of country music. And it was through country music I knew Nashville. I came here because Nashville was Music City, USA. I was trying to make one-of-a-kind clothes. That's my mission from day one. They are all originals. And nobody has escaped the rhinestones by Manuel, I don't think. To be a star is difficult. So I say, let me make you a suit that you love. It's made for you. So when they go on stage, they feel confident to be the stars that they really are.
It just makes you better because you feel better about how you look. You know, I've got a Manuel jacket on tonight, and I'm gonna sing my ass off.
Oh, my baby.
Well,
when you come in to get a fitting with Manuel, you can't be modest because he has to measure every part of you.
36 and a half.
He's the one that measures you, and he's the one that makes your image.
Look what I got for you.
oh my God, Manuel.
Pink is my favorite color. I love everything about these boots. I can wear them with everything.
Yeah.
Or nothing at all.
Growing up, I always saw the women with the great big hair and the sparkly earrings and jewelry and evening gowns, and it definitely evolved over the years. But there was still that classic look.
The greatest women, their images convey who they are truly, and it's authentic. When I started out, people tried to look through me to see my dad. So it was important for me to craft my own self. But in the beginning, when I was first signed to a record label, there was this meeting about my image. And the head of marketing said, "We just have to make her look fuckable." I was shocked. I mean, I shouldn't have been shocked, but I really was. You know, I was really confident about the music I wanted to make, and this is what it boiled down to. And I didn't play along. We're judged very quickly on image, but I want the image on an album cover to say something about what's inside. That's always the goal. And it's a collaboration with the photographer.
Music is very subliminal, and photography is obviously visual. It's a way of exposing yourself. I've never done drugs, I don't drink, I don't smoke. I take pictures. When I was at the peak of my career, I took a picture and someone said, "Wow, that's a great picture." I thought, really? I don't even know what I'm doing. So I hired a professional photographer to teach me the tricks, and it was just fascinating. I love to shoot people, and obviously I love country artists. And photography gave me a chance to get to know some of these people that I'd never met before. You know, I shot people like Faith Hill, Brad Paisley. Martina McBride. And as a photographer, you really do get a chance to feel their soul, feel what they're all about, and it's magical.
Photography can say an enormous amount, but one of the least enjoyable things for me is doing a photo shoot. When I came to Nashville, I was already an established artist in Australia. I had my look and my sound, but I was completely out of sync with everything that was happening in Nashville. As an artist, you should never compromise, but I think you do have to adapt. And so I had to start again. And in the midst of trying to fit in, I sort of lost myself. For my first solo record, I remember the label president saying, "It looks like the picture that comes with the frame." He was dead on too. But I had to keep believing. And all the covers I've been able to do have really captured, for better or worse, where I was at the time. And it was a slow process to get to where I am now.
Sometimes image can get in the way. Sometimes it's what made an artist work or what made them famous. I was hardcore traditional country, and nobody really said you need to have this image. But my label just thought, we just gotta get this girl some clothes. So they took me shopping, and it does give a girl from East Texas a little bit more confidence. And the camera really reads that. Don't listen to a great photographer can position you a certain way or put you in a certain setting that works. Can't you hear it call his name? Country music can be wrapped in all kinds of packages, but it's gotta have that heart and soul. And when the music and the image complement one another, that's when you have something really special.
When you're photographing a musician, there's expectations that are not just the photographers, not just the subjects. There are expectations by the record company or the management. In the 90s, when I first started trying to get work in country music, there were art directors whose point of reference was not just celebrity portraits. They were interested in beautiful pictures that would be an appropriate parallel for the music. And that's what country is about, being connected to something genuine. So I steered in the direction of making portraits of musicians. People like John Hyatt and the Carolina Chocolate Drops, taking that traditional music and making it their own. I know when I see beautiful light, and you can sit somebody down in that beautiful light and know that this is a gift. But a portrait is more than just the fall of light on a subject. A portrait is also a conversation. And the real making of that picture has to do with the interaction I have with the person. I first shot Lyle Lovett in '92 for the record Joshua Judge of Truth.
It was a private conversation. No one heard her say.
I'd done a few projects for Warner Brothers, and they thought it would be a good fit.
2,000 miles away.
The role a photographer plays in establishing an image depends on the relationship. And what's key for me is the trust that we've developed over the last 22 years.
Lyle has strong ideas about this image because he has a strong idea of who he is as a person.
I went to Nashville because Nashville was the city of songs and a place where I could play my own songs. And when it came time for me to start making records, I thought back to the classic photos. And there was a real dignity in the way people dressed. And that image of the country performer stays with you. So I decided to wear a suit. I didn't expect my hair to be anything of note, but it turned into something people remembered. Once something like that happens, you have to go with it and hope that it helps cement your identity in the mind of the public. What I'm imagining is just the venue in the background. It's a big deal to me that I've gotten to play here so many times over the years. To be able to make pictures here at Wolf Trap in Vienna, Virginia is fun.
It's kind of great, actually, with the snow falling. I'm thinking something dead center.
Lyle and I, when we work, it's kind of an improvisation.
It's lovely.
It's a tremendously creative environment. I feel completely comfortable working with Michael, and I can be completely myself.
There's something about that tree that's bugging me. If we got between these two trees, I think I'd be happy.
Okay. I arrive at a place and am just at the mercy of the environment.
That's good, Lyle.
I'm looking for those surprises.
And when he sends the contact sheets, there are always images that I didn't realize he had taken and that I didn't expect.
A still photograph allows you into this space that doesn't really exist in time. Then it becomes a trigger for the music.
As I lay sick and broken, Viva Mexico.
When you hear country music, you imagine the singer to be a character in those songs. And to see pictures just serves to reinforce that identity. But a successful picture of me is a picture that makes me look better than I look. That's what I'm looking for.
Got a date a week from Friday.
These days you're supposed to be an actress and a model. You're supposed to know how to express all of these feelings that are inside of you in so many different mediums and feel free enough to expose yourself and be that vulnerable.
Probably wouldn't be this way.
Leanne and I, we stepped out of the box on the very first video we did. She came up with the premise and trusted me as a director to let her go to that place and be real, to keep it real. I love being able to go back and forth between music videos and photography, but they're very different approaches. Music videos are very structured, whereas photo shoots are very spontaneous. You can go wherever you want to go, where the light is taking you, where the artist is taking you. My first professional photo session with Ryan Adams' Heartbreaker. It was an intense, amazing 2 hours, and it was a pretty great way to start. I photographed Jamie Johnson for Rolling Stone. He was a huge Waylon Jennings fan, and he had just purchased Waylon's Cadillac. Even with stills, I like to keep the artist moving because that's when you get that spontaneity. I was backstage with Eric Church. There was a little bit of time before the show, and there was a bar across the street, and the lighting was amazing. You only have a very limited time with the artist. You'll walk in totally cold, under the gun to get a great shot, and trying to establish that rapport right away, to get that natural feeling moment in 10 minutes. But when you actually can go out with the artist and hang out with them, that's when you get the most natural, real photographs. Like Emmylou Harris at Lawrence Records in Nashville. She got a big thrill out of going in and checking out all the vinyl. I'm trying to help create the vision they have for themselves. And that comes from listening to the music and then capturing the essence of the moment of the artist. Even an icon like Dolly, she's already Dolly when she walks in, but she puts her trust in you to create a great portrait, capture a moment. And I think a lot of music photographers secretly wanted to be artists. And is there anything cooler than being in the studio with one of your heroes? You can actually take a photograph. Willie, he's got such an amazing face. It's not hard to take some really great shots. They're legends, they're icons, but I do get to work with new artists who have their own voice, who have their own style. Like Casey Musgraves backstage at Bonnaroo, having fun with the image. I want a great shot, and I'm not afraid to try anything. Especially with artists who have a uniqueness in their sound and in their visuals and get it and stand up for it.
The spirit of the song guides our style. It's the visual extension of our music. We grew up on rock and roll and country, and our songs really are a blend of both of those genres.
Our musical style is very traditional. The three of us grew up loving Loretta Lynn, Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline.
And we maintain a lot of the traditional country songwriting. But when we record our songs, we take a lot of cues from modern music. And we like to make our songs as big as they possibly can sound.
Whatever we are portraying, whatever story we're telling, we just hope that folks get the spirit behind it and the authenticity.
As a musician, you hope to create moments, and people can relate to your music better if they can relate to your whole image. I love to get decked out and wear fun heels and dresses, but it doesn't really fit with the type of music that I'm doing. So on stage, I wear these jeans, these boots, and a black t-shirt. Simple Americana branding, but everyone has their own thing. You've got people doing very edgy fashion. You've got the more bedazzled guys, then you've got the simple guys with cowboy boots and jeans.
Today, I've seen people walk out on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry in a pair of jeans and a baseball cap. I didn't come to the Opry to get an oil change.
Although country music is very popular now, the music is not the same, the culture is not the same. The bands today have marketing teams, they have investors, it's a whole business. They call some places honky-tonks now, and they are physically, but it's a different audience. Trout's in Bakersfield is one of the classic places of country music. It's a remnant of what used to be. one of the last honky-tonks. It's an older crowd. There are people who are going out for a night on the town. It's people who come out to see Red Simpson. He's one of the originals, and they remember him. These places are going to disappear, but this is where the music's from, and it's part of the story.
Going back, I think there was something that was different that people gravitated to. When you look back at some of those 60s, 70s records, there was some great concept photography. They went out on locations, they thought about wardrobe, and the photo shoots were addressing the themes of that record, whether it was songs of the railroad or gunfighter ballads.
Those artists didn't have the bleached teeth and the faux 5 o'clock shadow and the, buff bodies. They had talent like you can't believe, and when you saw their pictures, it was beautiful.
I just remember listening to an entire album and never putting down the album jacket, looking at that cover and looking at the pictures on the back the entire time.
When you look at photos like the famous Johnny Cash one with the middle finger, the look on his face, that said it all.
That's the one image by the great Jim Marshall that summed up Johnny Cash, defying the establishment. And it's a reminder about how powerful an image can be. I actually met Johnny Cash. It was the week after June had passed, and I took some portraits of Johnny. He was in a wheelchair, but he was recording with Randy Scruggs and Marty Stewart.
Toward the end of his life, the work order became keep JR entertained. And so in the bedroom of the Cash home, we set up microphones and had recording sessions because music was what he was holding on to. At one of those sessions, the afternoon light started coming in on his back, and he looked like an old president. I said, JR. And he sat up straight and he gave me that look. And I took the photograph. It's the last portrait. He was John R. Cash, JR, Ray and Carrie's boy from Arkansas.
This music, at its best, is taking what seems personal and presenting it in a way that becomes universal. And that's why country music happens all over the world. And to a lot of people, it embodies the best parts of America.
I played from Denmark to Amsterdam to Italy to Spain, all these places. And the people in Europe are so into the stories and the songs of country.
I had people from Korea, from Poland, say, we learned to speak English listening to your music. I sang Morocco. 130,000 people sang along with all the songs. I did a thing called Glastonbury. 180,000 young people knew all the music.
We go to many countries and sell out performances all over the world. And there are artists today that have taken country music to where we took it and beyond.
People have always said, what's happening to country music?
Try to bring it back around.
Somebody's got to do something different, and it takes someone who's strong enough or unique enough to do something that people will go, wow.
Taylor Swift has helped propel country music into the forefront.
Taylor Swift represents a new kind of authenticity that hasn't been in country music before. She is a deft blend of traditional country with the mainstream appeal of pop music.
And for her to keep challenging herself musically, it had to go somewhere.
Losing him is blue like I never known. Missing him was dark gray all alone.
Taylor Swift, she had a great band. She sang great songs. She changed wardrobes. She flew across the stage, and she communicated with that audience. That's not exactly how Patsy Cline did it. That's okay, because Patsy Cline didn't do it exactly like Mother Maybelle.
Taylor had a lot of ideas, and so we were backstage, bouncing ideas off each other. She was totally game to try anything. But there's something about that gaze, that simple, honest look, and that's your goal.
Loving him is like driving a new Maserati
To capture the essence of that personality.
Photographs grab moments, and the photograph is one way to look at the lifespan of country music from its early roots to what it is today.
When you start thinking maybe things weren't a certain way, you look at those pictures and say, well, yeah, they really were that way, weren't they?
cowboy boots and rhinestones and big hair. All of those pictures explain what people thought about country music and where it came from.
We need to know who brought us to the dance and to learn the great history of our musical family.
Each artist has to stand out to make the image revealing so that it never fades away.
The camera gives a photographer a chance to represent them so that the public can see who they really are.
The people who last the longest are what they present, and they don't vary from who they are.
These are the alchemists, these are the magicians, and nothing has ever moved me the way music does. It's songs that get
grow and evolve.
Country music was stories about working people and what they did. It was music to drink to, cry over, fight over, and be nostalgic about.
All these artists and all these images shape people's perception of country music and country lifestyle. But it's really about what it does to your heart when you look at something.
Music is a conversation, and it's the greatest healing force in the universe.
Everybody gets their heart broke. Everybody wants something that they can't have. And these are the things that we sing about. Country music is the cry of the heart.
It will touch you and absolutely meet you with the truth. That's what Harlan Howard called country music, 3 chords and the truth.
It's that desire to believe something's genuine, sincere, and absolutely honest. That's what drives country music, and that's what people look for in a country song.
He was driving home one evening in his beat-up Pontiac when an old lady flagged him down. Her Mercedes had a flat. He could see that she was frightened, standing out there in the snow, till he said, "I'm here to help you, ma'am. By the way, my name's Joe." She said, "I'm from St. Louis, and I'm only passing through. I must have seen 100 cars go by. This is awful nice of you." And when he changed her tire and closed the trunk and was about to drive away, she said, "How much do I owe you?" Here's what he had to say. "If you really want to pay me back, here's what you do. Don't let the chain of love end with you."